Have you ever looked at your bank account and thought, man, if I just had more credibility, if people would just take me more seriously, I could get that loan, that investor, that opportunity? Maybe you're trying to get credit to start your business. Maybe you want investors to believe in your startup. Or maybe you just want the bank manager to approve that financing you know you can pay back. And then you think, those Wall Street guys, those rich family heirs, they don't need to prove anything. Doors just open for them. Well, what if I told you that a 22-year-old kid with no money, no real connections, with absolutely nothing, managed to make the world's biggest banks? I'm talking Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, believe that he controlled a $500 million investment fund. And it wasn't just believing. They offered him money. They competed for his attention. They treated him like financial royalty. For months, until it all fell apart. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about how financial credibility actually works, not how people think it works, but how it really works behind the scenes of the financial system. If you're someone who's ever felt invisible in the financial system, who's had your idea ignored because you didn't have the right last name or the right background, or who simply wants to understand how the hell people with zero qualifications manage to raise millions while you can barely get a decent credit card, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a like if this video helps you. Because the story I'm going to tell today isn't just about a scam, it's about how the financial system really works and why that should make you both furious and extremely alert. Here's the thing. In 2021, a guy named William Irby Jr., let's call him Billy, was 22 years old. He didn't have an impressive college degree, didn't have a brilliant finance career, didn't have a real investment fund. What he had was a last name, Irby. His father, William Irby Sr., had been CEO of a company called Ocwen Financial, a mortgage servicing giant that at its peak was worth billions. But here's the detail most people don't realize. In 2015, his father was forced out of the company after allegations of accounting fraud and irregularities. The company paid $2 billion in fines. His reputation was tarnished. But Billy realized something interesting. Wall Street has selective memory. They remembered that Irby once controlled billions. They didn't check very closely whether this specific Irby was legitimate. So Billy created a fake investment fund. He called it Saratoga International. He made a nice website. He created corporate documents that looked professional. And he started making calls. Now, you might be thinking, Nick, how would this work? Don't banks check these things? Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. Look, there's a reason why this scam worked, and it has everything to do with how the human brain, even the brain of seven-figure earning Wall Street bankers, processes credibility. There's a concept in psychology called anchoring bias. It's when your brain fixates on the first piece of information it receives and uses that as a reference point for everything that comes after. When Billy Irby called a bank and said, "I'm Billy Irby, I manage a $500 million fund focused on credit opportunities," the banker's brain did this, anchoring on the last name, Irby. Irby, where have I heard that? Oh yeah, that Ocwen guy, billions in assets. Confirmation bias. They wanted to believe this was a legitimate client because $500 million clients are rare and valuable. Competitive pressure. If Goldman Sachs was courting this guy, JP Morgan didn't want to be left out. A 2019 Harvard Business Review study found that financial professionals make credibility decisions in an average of 7 seconds when status signals are involved. 7 seconds. The math here is brutal. Billy didn't need to fool everyone. He just needed to fool enough to create a snowball effect. If Bank A believes you, you use that as a reference with Bank B. If both believe, Bank C thinks, man, everyone's doing business with this guy. Must be legit. Here's what most people don't realize about sophisticated financial scams. They don't work because the scammer is a genius. They work because the system has exploitable flaws. Billy built his scam on 3 pillars. Pillar 1, documentation that looked legitimate. He He created fake bank statements showing hundreds of millions of assets. He used basic editing software. We're talking about things you can download for free, but he understood something crucial. Bankers don't verify documents line by line when there's time pressure and competition. A former JP Morgan executive once told me, if a prospective client has $500 million and your competitor is trying to close them, you have 48 hours to make your pitch. There's no time for forensic auditing. Pillar 2, fabricated connections. He paid a few $1,000s to have a virtual office in Manhattan. Fancy address, conference room when needed, secretary who answered the phone saying Saratoga International, offices. Cost, less than $3,000 per month. Perceived value, millions. He also hired real consultants, legitimate people who didn't know the fund was fake, and paid them with money he didn't have. Bounced checks, delayed payments, but long enough to use them as references. Pillar 3, the almost deal dance. Here's the psychological genius. Billy never closed big deals. He was always about to close, always had diligence underway, always was waiting for investment committee approval. Why? Because the longer you stay in negotiations, the more emotionally invested the other side becomes. It's the same casino principle. The longer you stay at the table, the harder it is to get up and leave. A 2019 behavioral study showed that professionals who spend more than 30 hours in a negotiation are 340% more likely to ignore warning signs because their brain has already invested too much in the positive outcome. Yeah, so this is where it gets really insane. The banks weren't just believing Billy, they were competing for him. Goldman Sachs offered lines of credit. Deutsche Bank gave access to exclusive investment products. Smaller banks offered ridiculously low rates just to have Saratoga International as a client. And Billy started using that access to suck money out of the system. He'd open lines of credit at one bank using fake fund documents, use that money to make deposits at another bank, creating the illusion of cash flow, use that relationship to open more lines of credit at a third bank. It's a Ponzi scheme, but turbocharged with Wall Street institutional credibility. At its peak, Billy had access to over $90 million of credit from various banks. He was living in 5-star hotels, dining at restaurants where the menu has no prices, flying first class to meetings that went nowhere. Now, you might be thinking, Nick, but how did nobody check? How did nobody call to verify? Here's the painful truth. Some did make calls, but Billy had created a system where the references were circular. Bank A would call Billy's office, secretary would confirm, they'd call Bank B would say, yes, he has an account here, which was true, they just didn't mention the account was based on documents they also didn't verify. It's the financial equivalent of job references where all your friends pretend to be your former bosses. Look, every sophisticated financial scheme has the same fundamental problem: math. You can't take more money out of the system than you put in indefinitely. Eventually, the numbers stop adding up. For Billy, the moment of truth came when a smaller bank, a bank that had a lot to lose and did their diligence for real, started asking harder questions. They wanted audited statements. They wanted to speak directly with the custodian, the institution supposedly holding the $500 million. They wanted documentation that Billy couldn't forge without risking direct criminal charges. Billy did what every scammer does in that situation: bought time, made excuses. The auditor is on vacation, the custodian has new privacy protocols, my lawyer advised against sharing that. But time is the scammer's enemy. Meanwhile, another bank, not knowing about the first, also started asking questions, and then another. In March 2023, everything collapsed in about 72 hours. One bank filed a regulatory complaint. That alerted other banks. Suddenly, everyone was asking questions simultaneously, and when you pull multiple threads at the same time, the whole tapestry unravels. Billy was arrested at his Manhattan apartment. Federal charges: wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft. He's facing up to 30 years in prison. The banks? They lost tens of millions collectively, and most of them barely disclosed it because, let's be honest, it's super embarrassing to admit you got fooled by a 22-year-old kid. Here's what really bothers me about this story, and why I'm telling you about it.
It's not just about a scammer, it's about how the financial system really works versus how it should work. Lesson 1. Credibility is a currency, and it can be counterfeited. If you're trying to raise money for a business, get investors, or build financial credibility, you're competing against people who know how to manipulate status signals. That means you need to be strategic about how you build legitimate credibility. Professional documentation isn't optional. If your materials look amateur, you're at an immediate disadvantage. Connections matter. You need real, verifiable people who can vouch for you. Consistency over time builds real trust that scammers can't replicate. Lesson 2. The financial system operates on trust, not verification. Here's a statistic that should scare you. A 2022 study found that 68% of financial institutions do less than 3 hours of due diligence on clients who come through trusted referrals. 3 hours for decisions involving millions of dollars. What does this mean for you? If you're on the receiving end of financial